3 years ago, Dr. Salvador Allende was elected president of Chile. His was the first Marxist government ever to gain power by democratic means, and worldwide his victory raised the hope of justice and social reform without violence. But Allende died in the blazing ruins of the presidential palace. His violent overthrow was seen either as a victory for militarism, imperialism, big business, and the CIA, or it was seen as by many Chileans as the inevitable end of an incompetent government that had brought Chile to the edge of bankruptcy and civil war. Either way, Chilean democracy also died. This song was on the lips of the soldiers as they marched on the presidential palace. It happens to be a Nazi marching song. Traditionally, the armed forces have been popular in Chile. Generals and admirals have been national heroes, and traditionally, they've stayed out of politics. But when General Pinochet led his army against Allende, he believed he acted with the support of the majority of the Chilean people. His men still solemnly swear to loyally serve their country according to the established laws. General Pinochet, after 3 months in power, can still claim some popular support for the armed forces within Chile. Outside the country, they're unloved, and this they do not understand, any more than they understand the significance for us of Nazi songs and goose-stepping soldiers. The chief of police, plus the 3 service chiefs under the leadership of General Augusto Pinochet, make up Chile's ruling military junta. They meet daily at the top of an armor-clad skyscraper to plan national reconstruction and the total cleansing of the country of Marxism. Admiral Moreno believes the military task will take a year. Though the junta claims to have complete control over the country, there is still a state of siege. The order of the day: find the left-wing extremists believed to be still at large.
The whole country is searching.
Who is this character here called, what is it, El Mickey? Who is he?
He's a FDR.
FDR, what's that?
Revolutionary Party.
Yeah. And what was he doing that makes you want to find him? What were his activities, do you know?
Extremism.
He was an extremist?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
These are said to be weapons captured from the militant left, but the junta admits that there are still many undiscovered Marxist arms caches throughout the country that must be found. It seems that Chile's security forces are overextended. The call-up of reservists suggests that armed resistance from the left is being taken seriously. So far, there's little sign of it. But the nightly curfew is still in force, and the silence of Santiago is still broken by sporadic shots. At dawn, crowds still occasionally gather to view a corpse cast up by the river. Inevitably, people conclude this is part of the purge of Marxists, but Admiral Moreno says no.
We don't like killing anybody. Our armed forces are for defense against enemies from abroad, not inside. On the other hand, there's not many examples of countries getting rid of communism, so we are kind of a new experience, because if Spain got rid of communism, it was through a long war. For us, it only took us 6 hours, which is a different matter. So Spain, if we took the example of Spain, well, most of the communists were killed during the war, so they didn't have it. But we do have it. So we have to convince them. And that's our most important mission, socially, and we're doing it. We're using all the means we have, church and everything, to help us in getting these people into what they should be, just Chilean with some nationalism, and they want to make the country happy.
To make happy Chilean nationalists out of communists may not turn out to be easy, but in trying, the junta has been prepared to go far, 2,000 miles, to the southernmost tip of Chile. 60 miles from Cape Horn, in a PT boat of the Chilean Navy, I was taken across the Straits of Magellan to Dawson Island. Till recently, there was nothing here but a small naval base. Now, in what used to be a construction workers' camp, there's a new community. Till 3 months ago, these men ruled Chile. 35 members of President Allende's government and party organization have been interned here since the coup. Among them are 13 former cabinet ministers, 4 members of Congress, and an ex-ambassador to Washington. None of them has so far been brought to trial. A naval officer remarked seriously that the bracing climate and the isolation of Dawson Island could work a spiritual cure on the prisoners. On the understanding that I did not discuss politics, I was permitted to speak briefly to 2 of the prisoners about their conditions and treatment.
The treatment from the people of the camp,
yes.
I would say is good. We don't have any kind of things against that. Of course, we work.
And what sort of jobs are you doing?
Well, we dig holes and we put poles for electric transmission.
Yeah.
We make some repair in the roads. We go cutting timber and that kind of work related to the improvement of the island.
How do you spend your day?
Well, we start at 7. Later on, we have coffee and bread. At 8, we start working. We work till noon. Later on, we have luncheon. And we start working again at about 2. And we work from 2 till 5. Then we have a cup of tea and bread. And later on, from 6 to 8, we have organized some conference among ourselves in the different specialists. We have several specialists. We have several doctors, several lawyers, several engineers here. Economists and so on.
What do you do? What do you do?
Well, I am teaching my very poor English to other people of our group.
So what are your hopes for the next period of time?
To have lawyers and to go to trial and to clarify our legal situation.
Que esos procesos inicien, porque tenemos conciencia de no haber cometido ningún delito en relación con las leyes del país.
What we really want is to have those trials started in order, because we are absolutely convinced that we have not done anything against the law of our country.
Apart from that interview in the presence of the camp commander, we also snatched a few informal words with the prisoners, which confirmed that on the island their treatment had been reasonable, but they spoke of ill treatment en route to the jail, and again of their growing anxiety over the delay in charging them with any offence. I raised their complaint with the Minister of Justice. When would the prisoners be brought to trial?
Mire, primero desde el punto de vista estrictamente legal.
First of all, from a strictly legal point of view, according to the state of siege, the government can hold a person for up to 6 months. I don't wish to set any time limits which cannot be met in practice. I can only say that it will be as soon as possible.
Each morning as the flag is raised on Dawson Island, the prisoners assemble voluntarily with their captors to sing the national anthem. For all of them, but for different reasons, there may be a special significance to the words, "Sweet homeland, either you will be the tomb of the free or the refuge against oppression." The anthem celebrates Chile's liberation from Spanish colonial oppression. Once, these prisoners also felt they were freeing their country from capitalist oppression. But in the minds of the military, the second liberation came when they freed Chile from these, the supporters of Salvador Allende, and from Marxist oppression. This was the funeral of one of the victims of the right and left-wing political violence that began to emerge during the rule of the UP, the Unidad Popular. A presidential aide was shot, and Allende was there to bury him. In the final months before he was overthrown, Allende's position became hopeless. His UP coalition of 6 parties became increasingly divided. In a desperate effort to retain unity and lend authority to his administration, he brought his friend General Prats into the government for a second time and managed briefly to lure other generals to join him. But by this time, no amount of cabinet reshuffling could save him. The armed forces were already plotting, and Allende's friend Prats was forced to resign. Small wonder that Allende's supporters became disillusioned and discouraged. Some felt he betrayed them by not pursuing the revolution with sufficient vigor. Others that by failing to broaden the base of his government, he'd left them impossibly isolated. Everyone felt that a noble experiment had somehow been sabotaged. Everyone was suffering in the class war that had brought a chronically sick economy to a full stop. Soldiers were already on the streets before the coup, guarding a bankrupt country's dwindling stocks of fuel. Supplies of kerosene for heating and cooking were almost unobtainable, and Chileans learned to wait in line for everything, even for bread, or in this case for toothpaste, usually to be found only on the black market at outrageous prices. But with inflation at an annual 300%, the Chilean escudo was worthless anyway. As workers occupied more and more factories, the possibility of civil war was openly discussed. Leading the opposition to Allende's rule were the bus and truck operators. Many of these are owner-drivers, and like most small businessmen in Chile, they belong to trade organizations or gremios. The members of these gremios, the gremialistas, were convinced that the UP was out to break them by keeping them short of fuel and spares and would then nationalize them. So they went on strike and brought the economy to its knees. Alexandro Smith is a gremialista, a Chilean of British descent who owns 2 buses and a taxi. Though a left-winger, he struck against Allende.
Us left people felt more frustrated through the Allende government than those on the right. I was a member of the Radical Party for over 25 years.
Do you think that the efforts of the gremialistas could have brought down the Allende government, or do you think that the military takeover was inevitable?
Well, in a sense, I don't think we could have brought them down because Allende didn't take any notice of all these strikes, you see. The copper miners were on strike for 80-something days, and they bring in all the dollars to Chile. And the government didn't worry about that. We were on strike for over 40 days, and the people had all kinds of trouble to get to work and things like that, and the government didn't take any notice of it. So as far as striking and things like that would bring down the government, I doubt very much if it would. But of course, that went building up a pressure towards the military to take over. Yeah. And I'm sure that 80 or 85% of the people were very happy that the military at last did take the step to which they were compelled to do by us.
This farm is one of several thousand in Chile to be nationalized by Allende. The owner was legally relieved of 3/4 of his land. Others were illegally seized. Private investment in farming ceased and food production slumped. For many farmers, the army seemed their only hope.
Yeah, I'd given up hope that there would be any military takeover, actually. It was quite a surprise to me. A very pleasant surprise, I must say, because we'd given up hope of having been left with any of our farm at all.
As you say, you were taken over legally, but was there any attempt made in this area to take over farms illegally?
Yes, the farm next door to us, they had several times attempted to take them over by force by not allowing the owners out of their house or property.
You mean to say they were actually prisoners in their own house?
Yes, they were definitely. They were about 3 weeks shut in, that they could not leave their own garden. And although the wife of the owner of the farm was sick, they wouldn't let the ambulance in to take her out either. And the cops or the carabineros here, they tried to persuade the people to sort of let them in and let them out, and there was nothing doing. They just camped out there day and night. In other words, it was just a lock-in.
The Supreme Court in Santiago, where judges grew increasingly alarmed as Allende overruled court decisions. The president of the Supreme Court showed me letters he'd sent pointing out to the president that he was not acting constitutionally. Allende, whose program included the abolition of the courts, which he saw as enemies of the working class, wrote back to the judges telling them not to be impertinent. The president was at loggerheads with the whole power structure, except perhaps for the armed services. Allende had counted on the loyalty of the services and had done much to improve their pay and conditions. But within the Navy, the most conservative of the services, there were powerful forces working against him. Apart from an instinctive dislike of his policies, the Navy discovered last summer that left-wing elements had infiltrated their ranks and were attempting subversion among the ratings. At that point, they decided Allende had to go.
That was the main factor. That was the main factor. I think that was the, I would say, the initial spark.
How serious was that, in fact?
Very serious indeed. Very serious indeed.
I mean, you really felt that there might have been a mutiny?
Yes, we did. We did.
On September the 10th this year, the principal ships of the Chilean Navy were due to set out on maneuvers with the United States Navy. Government circles who were aware of naval disaffection with Allende breathed a sigh of relief at the departure of the fleet. But under cover of darkness, the ships turned around, and by dawn on the 11th, they'd taken control of the principal coastal towns. Communist sources claim the whole plan was carried out with the cooperation of the US Navy, and Washington has admitted some advanced knowledge of the coup, but denied any direct US involvement. Framed on his desk, Admiral Moreno keeps the letter, which confirmed that he had the support of the other service chiefs.
This is our last opportunity. And what should I say? If you don't put all the forces in Santiago, since the very beginning, we will not live to see the future. And it was signed, we agree. That's Lee and that's Pinochet. And that was it. No other preparation.
If there really was no other preparation than that, one can only say skeptically that the military operation was carried out with amazing force and efficiency. In the ruins of the Moneda Palace, President Allende died, and his legend was born. According to the junta, his death was suicide, but his widow believes he met his end at the hands of the military.
He died fighting. This we have established from the press, detectives and even firemen.
A widow is surely entitled to believe what she wishes. But when we visited Dawson Island, we heard a different version of how Allende died. Among the prisoners was Dr. Patricio Gijon, a member of the president's medical team who was in the Moneda when he died and who gave us this account of the last desperate moments.
And so the president said to us to surrender because it has no sense to remain there. There was no chance for us. I had a white coat, so the other doctors too, and I took my coat off, and in that moment I left all my gas mask on the ground, and the coat was used to make the white flag to the surrendering, and the group went off with the flag in front. I went with them, but I remember that I have left my gas mask, and I wanted to take it. So I came back, and in the moment I tried to meet the group that was going outside. I came in front of a big hall, and I saw the president sitting in a red sofa, and I think in that moment he shot himself.
Doctor, did you actually see President Allende shoot himself?
I was not beside him. I was about the length of the hall, in the other end.
Yeah.
But I saw him by sitting as his head blew off. I ran to him to see what I could what I could do as a doctor. But as I came beside him, I noticed there was nothing to do because he has literally blown up his head. And he had no pulse, his death was instantaneous.
Had the president been engaged in any fighting during the course of the morning, as far as you know?
No. There was no fighting inside the Monet. I'm absolutely sure because we were in the first floor and he was on the second, and we went up and down and saw all the people, and there was no shooting inside the Monet.
Dr. Gijon told me that story twice.
I hope it will no third time.
Once in the presence of fellow prisoners who say they accept it as the truth. Despite small inconsistencies, it is convincing. We were also able to examine unpublished photographs that entirely corroborate that account. But even if Dr. Gijon's story can persuade the world that the troops did not murder Allende, it will not wipe out the image of a bloody event. The world press did not report the coup d'etat as the salvation of Chile. They put the emphasis on the killing, the terror, the roundup of left-wing sympathizers and their internment in places like the National Stadium in Santiago. Some of those released had harrowing tales to tell reporters of their treatment at the hands of the armed forces.
30 prisoners who were held in room 1 under the VIP enclosure were brought into the arena. Some of them were my friends.
Gato, Carlos, Cherry, Huevito. Y el comandante les ordenó que corrieran.
Major Ramirez, the officer in charge, told them to start running. All the troops had machine guns. The troops fired. Some of the prisoners were literally ripped in two by the bullets.
To the military mind, the reporting of these stories was part of an international plot against Chile, heavily financed by the communists. Admiral Huerta has no doubt about it.
Certainly there is a large-scale press campaign against Chile by some members of the international press. Obviously an organization had already been set up to handle this campaign because it was put into operation immediately and had considerable financial resources. It did meet with a response in certain circles, mainly in universities and among students and in some intellectual circles. But not in all areas, and especially not in those which concern us, namely financial, industrial, and government circles.
Admiral Moreno believes communists have an almost demonic power over men's minds.
We found in the Communist Party, in the Central Communist Party here, small booklet called Psychopolitics. After I read that little pamphlet, and how, I wouldn't know the English word for that, subtle, I would say,
Subtle.
Subtle, yes. It's by dropping words here and there in any article, they can make a good housewife think that that's the best way to solve the problem.
Desde el Gran Valparaíso.
The junta has made quite sure that the insidious Marxist message will no longer be heard in Chile. All left-wing radio stations or newspapers have been either closed down or taken over. 400 journalists have lost their jobs and some have been detained. This station, once run by a socialist group, has been taken over by the Gremilistas, and even they must exercise strict self-censorship according to guidelines such as these. Maximum publicity for the proclamations and instructions of the junta. No party political articles of any kind. It is forbidden to disseminate news of a military nature, and so on.
If you regiment minds, you go back into Hitler's system or something like that. We just hate that thing. Everybody's allowed to think whatever they like. But we don't allow it right now, that those ideas that could be political.
When we took the government, all the schools were running programs and using books which were completely politicized, and they were intended to brainwash, to make a brainwashing in the minds of the students. And all the teachers also were especially devoted to that. They wanted to create a new man.
If the new man was created in this classroom, he seems to have been rapidly erased. But under Allende, efforts were made to stimulate political awareness in the classroom, and some of the textbooks did have a leftist political content. The junta says that apart from destroying the textbooks, their most urgent task has been with the teachers themselves, amongst whom Marxist views were widely held. Has this meant removing quite a lot of teachers from their positions?
We have removed perhaps 15%. We can't remove everybody because we'll be lacking then of the amount of teachers. Yeah. But we are keeping many of them, but we keep a good control, or we try to keep a good control of what they are doing.
Ahora, si esto nosotros lo trasladamos.
To control the University of Concepcion, the junta installed as rector a retired Navy captain. He's already sacked 170 of the teaching staff, closed down entirely the faculties of journalism and sociology, and purged student bodies that, admittedly under Allende, had become grossly enlarged by politically inspired admissions.
First of all, the university was completely open to any student practically that he wanted to come inside the university. So we had an enormous increase of students. And that was how the university, from approximately 7,000 students in a matter of 3 years, it's increased up to 17,000. So you imagine what that means on academic standards. It was impossible. And the staff was exactly more or less the same. So it was very bad. And on academic standards, it had decreased a great deal, really.
Well, now you've lost a lot of students and a lot of the teaching staff as well. Do you feel that this is fair and just?
Well, that's very difficult, you know, because on this situation it's very difficult to say what is fair and what is just, you know.
Even those who felt that the universities had become dangerously over-politicized are shocked at the number of students expelled in Concepcion. Following the coup, every student was required to re-register and obtain a new identity card. But when the lists were published, only 10,000 out of 16,000 were permitted to re-register. 6,000 have either been dismissed or suspended. Suspensions were largely for academic reasons. Dismissals were handed out on the advice of military intelligence, who questioned 800 students about their political activities. Those suspended may reapply for admission next March, and the rest can enter these written appeals against dismissal. But undoubtedly, a large number will remain out in the cold.
What is the future for the very large number of students who have been suspended or dismissed from the universities?
The government is looking for them work. We want them to work because it was the old government was using a slogan which says "University for everybody," and that is a thing which is not possible.
A view that would find wholehearted support with this audience. Chile's middle-class women were Allende's bitterest enemies and are potentially the junta's best friends. Colonel Pedro Ewing, the junta's chief propagandist, spends much of his time explaining the government's policies. And on the question of prices, he has some fast talking to do, even to this captive audience. He has to convince them that horrendous price rises are the consequence of correcting Allende's economic errors that emptied the shops and shoved all the goods onto the black market. At present, the middle class are prepared to believe in the junta.
Well, they haven't been in power very long, of course, but I think they've done an extremely good job in a short time. I think the country's got back to running normally again from absolute chaos that it had been in. It's incredible. I never expected that you could get things running so quickly again.
What do you mean economically you're talking about now?
Economically and, I mean, working. I mean, the trains are running on time, the planes are running on time, everything's cleaner, the streets and been completely painted over, cleaned up.
Among country people, the junta is making a special effort to maintain a favorable image, and with some success. This rodeo on the outskirts of Santiago is giving all its profits to the National Reconstruction Fund, set up to encourage self-sacrifice at a time of crisis. The junta has also promised that there'll be no going back on the land reform program. The government's most popular move has been to give to all farm workers resettled during the past 3 years legal title to the land they farm. This has upset a few big landowners who were hoping to get their acres back, but among the thousands whose position on the state-owned farms has never been made clear, the junta will have found friends. But in the grim shanty towns where Allende found his main support, there is both fear and despair. First the endless arms searches and the arrests, and now the economic crunch. This shopkeeper told us that because of the price rises, there are some basic foods like sugar he can't even afford to stock. Though the prices of a few commodities are still controlled, most have soared outside the reach of the masses of the poor, and little luxuries like sweets and soft drinks are now out of the question. The junta has fixed the minimum wage at 12,000 escudos a month, but many employers are not paying it. And even if they are, a visit to the stores in central Santiago shows how far 12,000 escudos will go. A sale price shirt is more than 2 weeks' wages. A week's money won't buy a pair of shoes. And the tweed jacket at 16,000 escudos will take 5 weeks to earn. In the docks at Valparaiso, productivity is also up, whether because of the exhortations of the junta to work harder or because 4 dock union leaders were shot, allegedly trying to escape, one cannot say. They'd been trying to organize a strike. British dockers were shocked when they heard of the death of their Chilean brothers and began to black Chilean ships. But the union leaders here, who have to live with the junta, say that though they're grateful to the British workers for their solidarity, the blacking of cargoes will hurt them the most. And they're sending a delegation to Britain to explain why they're working with the junta.
The reason is that up till now, and I repeat, up till now, they are respecting our agreements and our social achievements, but most of all, they are maintaining the union structure, which is the most important thing for us.
Though the junta has outlawed all Marxist unions, they're still dealing with these former Christian Democrat organizations. With a farm workers' union official, we visited a vineyard where 5 men had been fired for their rebellious and insubordinate attitudes. After a heated exchange with the vineyard owner, we left and were promptly arrested by the army. The union official was warned not to visit his members without military permission. The local shop steward was far from happy.
The junta, with its decrees restricting trade unions' freedom, puts pressures on the unions and leaves the bosses a free hand. They should place fewer restrictions on the unions, and many of the slogans issued by the junta should be put into practice, because they claim that no one here is persecuted for political reasons. But in practice, we can see that people are clearly being persecuted for their political opinions. The junta should practice what its decrees and its representatives preach. They should practice what they preach.
There is a striking difference between what the junta says and what is done in its name. Local commanders like General Manuel Torres de la Cruz, 2,000 miles from Santiago in Punta Arenas, very much runs his own show. Each morning he makes on-the-spot inspections of state enterprises around the town. Accompanied by his own publicity machine, he swoops at random to find out if everyone is getting to work on time. Unpunctuality is equated by General Torres with Marxist attitudes, and so are long hair, beards, and folk songs, except those of Patagonian shepherds. A surprise visit to a local dairy revealed that every worker had turned up 20 minutes early. They have good reason to stand in awe of General Torres. Under Allende, extra workers were taken on to help control unemployment. Under Torres, they've all been fired. Throughout the nationalized industries, former managers have been replaced by delegates from the armed forces. In the case of this oil refinery, by a Navy engineering officer. His first task has been to purge the workforce. Out of 1,200 employees here, 200 were dismissed. How were they selected?
Well, I had an interview with all the chiefs of departments that they told me about the antecedents of everybody. And also we found a lot of lists of the Marxist parties.
What precisely was on these lists?
Well, it was the names of the people and the parts of, for example, in the Communist Party, the parts where cells where they were distributed in the refinery.
In the commander's office, a plainclothes investigator from military intelligence produced lists of workers categorized 1X, 2X and 3X according to their degree of militancy, plus descriptions like agitator, frequently at political meetings, bad worker and so on. At every factory we went to, the same process of elimination had been carried out. At one factory, 600 had been dismissed, at another 200. The total nationwide has been estimated at 15% of the workforce now unemployed.
What has happened to the 200 men that you dismissed?
Unfortunately, I don't know. I suppose they are without work at the moment. But I hope that the government can find something for them to do.
Those sacked by the military can only turn to the church for help.
The laborer problem, well, it's I would say much worse, because families don't have nothing to eat. They have absolutely no money, nothing. Many people have arrived to where the churches are receiving people, walking because they didn't have money enough for paying the bus. That means they have to walk 2, 3, 4 hours sometimes. I've spoken with people who have walked 4 hours just to make a simple question. What can I do? My husband has no work. We have nothing to give to our boys. And there is no possibility of working here. Because wherever I go, they ask me, where were you working before? Answer, someplace. When did they finish your job? After the 11th of September. That means there's no work for you. So they can't find work. They need money for feeding their boys, for dressing, and they have no possibilities.
During the months that the National Stadium was used as a prison, the families and friends of thousands of internees clustered outside day in, day out, waiting for news. Sometimes the news never came. Of the many who disappeared, we know positively of 3 men who were identified alive and well in military custody and who were later found dead, 1 in the streets, 1 in the river, and a 3rd in the morgue. We raised the matter with Admiral Moreno, who promised to investigate. But so far we've heard nothing. Nor has anything been said by the junta to refute hundreds of allegations that torture has been routinely used in the interrogation of prisoners.
The things that I suffered, cannot be really told, but that is not so important as the things that I saw there. People were tortured, particularly manual workers and students.
These witnesses, while they remain in Chile, are afraid to reveal their identity before a camera, almost too frightened even to talk to us informally. And they do have a reason. While we were trying to chat with them, we were spotted by a police patrol, arrested and ordered to stop filming. There's little wonder that in such a climate of fear and in the absence of official frankness, myth and rumour should flourish. Reputable journalists have been reporting massacres by the armed forces and putting the total number of dead in Chile at between 10 and 20,000. Now, we tried very hard to check out these reports, and I'll give you 2 examples of our findings. There have been widespread reports of heavy fighting at the Sumar textile factory with hundreds of workers killed. Now, when I went to the factory and talked to workers and managers, they all agreed that there had been fighting, but no one could swear to more than 2 or 3 deaths. One man who left the factory just before the fighting began said that there were only 60 people left to defend the place, and a soldier involved in the fighting put the total number of dead at 35. Even more disturbing was the case of a man we considered to be an expert witness. He claimed to have made a special study of atrocities carried out by the armed forces. He told of a slum in Santiago near the Mapucho River, where local people had taken 700 bodies out of the river and buried them on its banks. When we went there, only 1 grave was clearly visible. The local people put flowers on it, and when we questioned those directly involved, they spoke not of 700, but of 28 graves, and of 24 at another position further up the river. There's little doubt in my mind that the official figure of just over 1,000 dead is an underestimate. Even Chilean newspapers that support the government are talking about 2,000 or 3,000 dead. But equally, figures of 10 to 20,000 are, to say the least of it, unsubstantiated. But as one Chilean said to me, for God's sake, isn't 1,000 dead enough for you? And quite apart from the grim numbers game, there are plenty of atrocities and irregularities that can be fully substantiated. There's no doubt that some policemen have been using the present turmoil to get rid of known criminals and so-called delinquents. They simply take them from their homes and shoot them. They, of course, died trying to escape from custody. There's also no doubt that some of the courts-martial have been a travesty of justice. For instance, I've established from 2 wholly reliable sources that the decision to execute 6 men at the town of Porto Montt in mid-October was taken 24 hours before the so-called trial. Very often, because only 48 hours notice is given of the courts-martial, there's no chance to engage a lawyer or to prepare a defense.
If there is no lawyer available, the defensor, will be anyone. He may be an officer of any of the armed forces.
Yeah. And why is it so difficult to get a defense lawyer to these people?
Many have no means of, no money enough for paying them, even though many Christian lawyers are charging us especially low fees. But even though the cases are so many that the amounts of money needed are great, I hope that the help of the Christian world, not only Chilean Christians, will somehow reach us, because if not, we won't be able to manage.
If this is anything to go by, the prisoners are going to need all the help they can get. On Dawson Island, a new prison camp with space for 500 men is rapidly nearing completion. This one hut, about 25 yards long, will accommodate 86 men. The place has been built to last. When will the whole camp be completed, do you think?
About 13 days more.
30 days?
Yes.
About another month. So this implies that you expect the prisoners to be here quite a long time, huh?
Maybe... No, I don't think so. Maybe it's the time necessary to make the trials and so on, you see?
Yeah.
It's a confined camp to keep the men expecting their trial, you see?
But you don't expect to have them here after the trials?
I hope not.
You hope not?
Yes.
For these at least, the shades of the prison house are receding. They're some of the 10,000 Chileans and foreigners who were given refuge by the UN and by a number of embassies and have since been permitted to leave the country. A Chilean explained to me why he was leaving.
When you are scared, when you cannot sleep, when you know of casualties among friends of yours, when every night and every day is a piece of news that frightens you, that creates an atmosphere of terror within your own family, then you've got to leave.
Faced with this wretched story, one should remember that many Chileans who stayed do not blame the military for all the violence, nor were they surprised by it.
I think that we expected a lot more violence, and I'm sure if the UP had taken over as they were trying to do, well, the dead would have littered the streets practically. By the way, the country was so divided that you had to expect some kind of violence. It showed itself at homes, when you visited friends. You couldn't start a conversation without it turning into politics, and then you would go like a cat and dog, one against the other, if your ideas were different.
And what is it, for example, these summary executions, how is that regarded by the ordinary Chilean, by you?
Well, I think that, personally, that there shouldn't be any more executions now, because we've no revolution going on. There's no danger of counter-revolution at all. I don't see the reason that they should carry on, if they are, I don't know, carry on shooting people.
At the military college in Santiago, to mark 2 months of deliverance from Marxist rule, representatives of the armed forces celebrated a special mass.
Buenos días.
The influence of the Catholic Church is strong in Chile, and this service represents the conservative aspect of it. But there is another and more liberal Catholic Church that is potentially a strong political force. The Christian Democrats, the biggest single political party, provided progressive leadership before Allende, and as an alternative to military rule, it would probably be welcomed by many. At present, the Christian Democrats are waiting in the wings, waiting to be consulted by the military.
Do you take advice from the politicians?
Oh, yes, undoubtedly. Of course. It's normal. Because my job is to run navies, not to run countries. So I don't know how politicians do things. So we ask them how it should be done. And they're fair enough to say things the right way.
Admiral, what is the future for the non-Marxist parties in Chile? What part are they going to play?
At this very moment, they are not active parties, because we don't have political parties. And we don't belong to any political party. And had no political colors neither. We're sailors or army.
The junta claims to have acted on the 11th of September on behalf of all the Chilean people. But since I've been here, I've had the impression that the middle class here feel it was their victory. Now, how are you going to convince them that it was not?
On the contrary, I'm convinced that it was their victory, that we were acting according to the Constitution in defense of that people.
At the Santiago racetrack, a police band entertains the public with Chile Lindo, beautiful Chile. And for these people, it is beautiful. In the bitter class struggle, they've emerged victorious. And their victory is now protected by the armed forces. Now that the middle class has resumed its ascendancy over the disadvantaged, it remains to be seen if the junta will make Allende's mistake and try to rule only in the interests of its own class supporters.
Segundo, corre Zapallar un tanto abierto. Por dentro que en el terreno pasa tiempo. Y Gazzaniga avanza muy fuerte.
At present, certainly, the middle class is displaying to the full its natural instinct to be the winner. This party in the suburbs of Santiago was given by the family of an engineer who lost his job under Allende when the factory he worked in was nationalized. He could see no future in Chile, and at the time of the coup he was preparing to leave the country. Among people like this, and there are many of them, expressions of support for the junta are even set to music. The song is called My General.
3, 4.
Es Chile quien lo ha llamado mi general. Es Chile quien lo ha llamado.
It is Chile who has called upon you, my general. The flag is flying, my general, from north to south, calling us to work, my general. The Andes are standing, my general. Into the furrow goes the seed, my general. The hands of the Chileans are ready to work, my general.
Van regando los campos, alimentando a su gente. Llegó la hora de la patria, el clamor ya se siente. Es Chile quien lo haya